There is a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry built almost entirely on the idea that health comes in a capsule. Standardized, purified, stripped of everything the original plant once contained. And every spring, without a second thought, people across the country pay good money to spray, pull and poison the very plants that kept their great-grandparents alive through winters, wars, and illnesses that modern medicine wasn't there to treat. The plants were never lost. They were reclassified. Not as medicine, not as food, but as nuisances. As eyesores. As competition for a perfect lawn. And while that cultural shift was happening, the research kept accumulating, quietly, persistently in university laboratories, in ethnobotanical journals, in peer-reviewed studies that most people will never see, concluding the same thing that soldiers and herbalists and village healers knew for centuries: patrumycin pur, rise. These plants actually work. Today we're breaking down 12 of those plants. 12 weeds, the kind you have walked past, pulled out, or sprayed this season, each with a documented medicinal history stretching back hundreds or thousands of years. Pay close attention to number 1. It has been studied continuously for over 40 years across multiple disease categories simultaneously, and most people spray it with herbicide every April. And stay with us for number 6. It carries a story of physical collapse in a wilderness, a single plant, and a journey that changed the course of an entire civilization. That story isn't just scripture. The physiology behind it is real, and what that plant contains explains everything. 12 plants. Let's begin. Number 12. Chickweed. The winter survivor with chemistry that stops itch at the source. Chickweed looks almost too fragile to matter. Thin branching stems. Tiny oval leaves. Small white star-shaped flowers that appear in mild weather from late winter through spring. It grows low, covers bare soil quickly, and vanishes when summer heat arrives. In the coldest months, when almost nothing else is green, chickweed is already spreading. That cold season timing isn't coincidental. It's a signature of what this plant is built to do. Chickweed was documented in European folk medicine traditions for centuries, particularly for skin conditions. Greek physicians referenced cooling plant preparations for inflammations of the skin, and medieval European herbalists. That consistent cross-cultural reputation for cooling and soothing isn't mysticism. It points toward repeatable chemistry. The leaves and stems of chickweed contain saponins and phytosterols, compounds with documented anti-inflammatory and antipyretic effects, meaning they reduce itching at the tissue level through a measurable mechanism. Coumarins present in the plant also contribute to its mild analgesic properties. For eczema, psoriasis, hives, insect bites, and any condition defined by surface inflammation and persistent itch, fresh chickweed, applied directly to the skin, produces a cooling, calming response that herbalists documented for generations and that modern botanical research. What makes this noteworthy is the comparison to hydrocortisone cream, the standard pharmaceutical recommendation for most of these conditions. Hydrocortisone suppresses immune activity broadly and effectively in the short term, but causes measurable skin thinning with prolonged use. Chickweed appears to reduce local inflammatory signaling without that trade-off. That distinction matters for anyone managing a chronic skin condition. Crush fresh leaves into a paste and press directly onto irritated or itching skin for immediate relief. For sustained use, cold-infused dried chickweed in a neutral carrier oil, such as sunflower or shoba, for 4 to 6 weeks in a sealed jar away from light, then strain and apply as needed. The plant is also edible. Its flavor is mild, slightly sweet, similar to corn silk, and it works well as a salad green or added raw to soups at the last moment before serving. The delicate stems wilt quickly with heat. The plants growing in January, when your garden looks like nothing, may be among the most pharmacologically active things on the property. Number 11. Stinging nettle. The plant that attacks you and then heals you. The first lesson most people learn about stinging nettle is a painful one. Brush against the leaves without gloves, and within seconds there is a burning sting that can linger for hours. That reaction comes from microscopic hollow silica needles on the leaf surface, technically called trichomes, that break on contact with skin and inject a mixture of formic acid. It is, by any measure, an aggressive plant. What makes nettle genuinely strange is what it does when you consume it. Across Germanic, Slavic, and Celtic traditions, Nettle was harvested every spring with a specific understanding that winter had depleted the body, its minerals, its blood, its vitality, and this plant could restore what was lost. Roman soldiers stationed in Britain are recorded as having rubbed nettles onto their legs to generate circulation warmth in the cold northern climate. That's not a folk tale. It's a documented military practice, and it reflects a sophisticated intuitive understanding of what the plant does chemically. Modern research has confirmed something remarkable. Freeze-dried nettle leaf has been studied in randomized clinical trials for seasonal allergies, and results show a statistically meaningful reduction in histamine response in a substantial portion of participants. The irony that researchers themselves have noted, a plant that injects histamine on contact appears to modulate histamine response when taken internally, points toward a more complex mechanism involving the flavonoids quercetin and camphorol, which inhibit the enzymes responsible for histamine synthesis and release. Nettle root, separately studied, contains lectins and polysaccharides that have demonstrated inhibitory effects on sex hormone-binding globulin, which is the proposed mechanism behind its documented benefits for benign prostatic hyperplasia. Multiple controlled trials have found nettle root extract measurably reduces urinary symptoms in men over. Nutritionally, nettle leaf is extraordinary by any standard. Iron levels comparable to red meat. More calcium per gram than dairy. Significant magnesium, vitamin K, and a complete amino acid profile unusual for a plant food. 1 cup of blanched nettle leaf delivers meaningful amounts of nearly every micronutrient the body relies on daily. Blanch fresh leaves for 30 to 45 seconds in boiling water. The sting neutralizes completely. From that point, cook exactly like spinach, in soups, sautéed in butter, folded into eggs, stirred into pasta. For tea, steep 1 tablespoon of dried leaf in hot but not boiling water, around 85 degrees Celsius, for 8 to 10 minutes. The mineral content remains stable through gentle heat. Drink 1 cup in the morning during allergy season or as a daily spring tonic. The most aggressive plant in your garden may also be the most nourishing. Number 10. Plantain. The weed that follows humanity and heals it. Not the banana. The flat, low-growing plant with oval ribbed leaves and a central seed spike that appears in every compacted lawn, every gravel path, every sidewalk crack. Common plantain grows on every continent where humans have settled. When European colonists arrived in North America, it spread so rapidly along their trails that multiple indigenous nations gave it the same name. That story usually ends there, treated as a historical footnote. What it leaves out is that those same nations adopted plantain into their own medicinal practice, not out of cultural curiosity, but because the outcomes were visible and fast. That rapid adoption across independent medical traditions is itself significant. It suggests the plant's effects were obvious enough to be undeniable. The leaves contain aucubin, an iridoid glycoside, and actiosides, both of which actively reduce inflammatory signaling, inhibit certain bacterial growth, and slow minor bleeding through a documented mechanism. Laboratory studies have confirmed these are measurable biochemical effects. What makes plantain stand out from most medicinal plants is the speed of topical action. Crush a fresh leaf, press it onto an insect sting, a minor cut, or an inflamed bite, and the swelling and discomfort typically ease within minutes. Not hours. Minutes. That's not a placebo response. A 2015 clinical study found that plantain ointment outperformed standard pharmaceutical treatment on second-degree burns, a result that drew serious attention from botanical medicine researchers. There is also something worth noting about how the ribbed structure of the leaf itself concentrates aucubin. The compound is densest along the veins, which is why traditional preparation, rolling or crushing the whole leaf rather than just tearing it, releases the most active material. That structural detail is something most wellness discussions never mention. Press a fresh crushed leaf directly onto a sting or bite for immediate field relief. For ongoing use, make a strong tea from 2 teaspoons of dried plantain leaf in hot water for 10 minutes. Use it as a wound rinse or drink it for mild respiratory inflammation. Infuse dried leaves in olive oil for 4 weeks to make a base for healing salves. The plant is edible. Young leaves are mildly bitter and work in salads. A plant that grows everywhere humans walk, studied in clinical trials for wound healing. Most people rip it out without a second look. Number 9. Yarrow. The battlefield herb that knew what it was doing. The name Achillea millefolium is not accidental. Ancient Greek tradition holds that Achilles used yarrow to treat the wounds of soldiers during the Trojan War. Whether that is mythology or documented practice, the reality is this: yarrow has one of the longest uninterrupted medicinal records of any plant on Earth, and the primary application was always the same. You packed it into wounds to stop bleeding and prevent infection. That wasn't sentiment. That was field medicine that kept people alive before any other option existed. The active compounds responsible for yarrow's hemostatic effect, its ability to stop bleeding, are achillene and other alkaloids that measurably promote platelet aggregation. Modern laboratory studies have confirmed this is a real biochemical mechanism, not a folk belief. What separates yarrow from almost every other medicinal plant is that it performs two distinct functions simultaneously. It arrests bleeding while also promoting tissue repair and reducing infection risk through the same alkaloid and flavonoid profile. Most plants are good at one or the other. Very few do both. That dual action is precisely why battlefield medicine valued it above almost everything else available in the field for 2,000 years. Yarrow was carried into campaigns by Roman legions, recorded in Anglo-Saxon herbals as a standard wound treatment, used by multiple Native American nations for identical purposes, and documented in Chinese medicine for fever and digestive inflammation simultaneously. That level of cross-continental convergence on identical applications, independent cultures arriving at the same plant for the same purposes, represents something beyond coincidence. It represents generations of careful, consistent observation producing consistent results. The anti-inflammatory sesquiterpene lactones in yarrow also make it effective as a tea for fever management, specifically by promoting diaphoresis, the kind of productive sweating that helps the body move through a fever rather than simply suppressing it. That approach to fever is one of the oldest in human medicine and remains the basis of much of traditional herbalism across Europe and Asia. For topical wound application, crush fresh yarrow leaves and press them firmly onto a minor cut. Bleeding typically visibly slows within 2 to 3 minutes. For fever or digestive inflammation, steep 1 teaspoon of dried yarrow flower in hot water for 10 minutes, covered. Drink up to 3 cups per day during illness. The flavor is slightly bitter and aromatic, best with a small amount of raw honey. 2,000 years of battlefield use, followed by laboratory confirmation of the mechanism. The herb didn't need the research to work, but the research is satisfying anyway. Number 8. Dandelion. The liver's oldest ally. Everything about dandelion's reputation in modern culture is inverted. It is the most aggressively targeted weed in suburban lawn care. Entire product lines exist solely to eliminate it. The plant being exterminated is nutritionally denser than nearly every cultivated green in the produce section, medically documented for centuries across multiple continents, and contains compounds specifically studied for liver and gallbladder function that no pharmaceutical has managed to replicate in self-correcting form. Ancient Egyptian physicians used dandelion root as a liver tonic. Traditional Chinese medicine classified it as a bitter herb for moving liver qi, a conceptual framework that translates functionally into stimulating bile production and improving digestion. Arabic physicians of the medieval period used it under the name taraxacum, from which the plant's scientific genus Taraxacum is directly derived. 3 independent medical traditions, separated by geography and culture, converging on the same plant for the same organ. Modern research has begun to explain the mechanism. Dandelion root contains taraxacin and taraxacinin, sesquiterpene lactones, along with inulin, a prebiotic fiber. The bitter compounds in the root measurably stimulate bile production from the liver and improve bile flow from the gallbladder. Bile flow matters because it is the primary mechanism through which the liver moves processed metabolic waste and fat-soluble toxins out of the body and into the digestive tract for elimination. A sluggish gallbladder means a slower detox pathway. Dandelion root addresses that mechanism directly, and in a form that the body recognizes as food rather than medication. The leaves operate differently. They act as a natural diuretic, one of the most studied plant-based diuretics available, but with one property no synthetic pharmaceutical has managed to include. Dandelion leaf replenishes the potassium it removes, because the leaves themselves are extraordinarily rich in it. That self-correcting mechanism means using dandelion leaf doesn't create the potassium depletion that pharmaceutical diuretics routinely cause. More beta-carotene than carrots. More calcium than milk by weight. Significant iron, vitamin C, and vitamin K. Roast dried dandelion root at 175 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes until it turns deep brown, then brew it like coffee, 1 tablespoon per cup, steeped for 10 to 15 minutes. The flavor is rich, slightly bitter, genuinely satisfying. Add young spring leaves to salads when they are least bitter. Dried leaf and root together make a mineral-rich daily tea. The plant people spend significant money to destroy has been maintaining human liver health since before recorded medicine began. Number 7. Purslane. The succulent with more omega-3s than most fish. Purslane is a low-growing succulent with thick reddish stems, small paddle-shaped leaves that store water in their tissue. It spreads across garden beds through the summer with a speed that frustrates gardeners. Researchers studying its chemistry have a genuinely different reaction. In the ancient world, purslane was not a weed. It was a cultivated food crop. Ancient Greeks and Romans grew it deliberately. It appears in the writings of Dioscorides. The Aztec civilization used it as a staple food under the name verdolaga, and Mexican cuisine still does. Ayurvedic medicine classified it as cooling and anti-inflammatory. Middle Eastern traditional medicine used it for gut complaints, skin conditions, and fever. The trajectory of purslane in Western culture, from cultivated food to despised weed, is one of the more striking reversals in botanical history. The research explains why every traditional culture that encountered purslane kept it. Purslane contains the highest concentration of omega-3 fatty acids ever measured in a land plant, specifically alpha-linolenic acid, in amounts that researchers describe as exceptional for a leafy green. Some analytical studies have found purslane delivers more omega-3s per gram than certain cold-water fish species. That single measurement changes the entire conversation about this plant. Omega-3 fatty acids are foundational to cardiovascular health, neurological function, and the management of chronic inflammation, the underlying driver behind most modern degenerative disease. For populations eating heavily processed, plant-depleted diets, omega-3 deficiency is common and consequential. The solution has been growing uninvited in their gardens the entire time. Purslane also contains melatonin at concentrations higher than most measured plant foods, relevant for sleep regulation and circadian rhythm support. It contains glutathione, the body's primary intracellular antioxidant, along with meaningful magnesium, potassium, and vitamin C. The combination of anti-inflammatory fatty acids, antioxidants, and minerals in a single succulent weed. Eat it raw in salads. It has a mildly lemony, slightly crunchy texture that holds up well with oil and vinegar. Sauté lightly in olive oil with garlic for 2 to 3 minutes, maximum to preserve omega-3 content, which degrades rapidly with prolonged heat. Add raw to soups at the very end of cooking. The flavor is pleasant and mild. The weed pulling itself out of your vegetable bed every week is nutritionally comparable to a serving of salmon. Number 6. Ground elder. The monks knew what they were planting. Ground elder is one of the most despised garden weeds in temperate Europe. It spreads aggressively through underground rhizomes, regrows from the smallest fragment of root left in the soil, and once established, gardeners who discover it describe it as close to ineradicable. That tenacity has made it a source of genuine frustration for centuries. And it has been in those gardens since the Middle Ages, because intelligent people put it there deliberately. Medieval monastic communities cultivated ground elder specifically as medicine for gout, the painful inflammatory condition caused by uric acid crystal deposition in the joints, particularly in the feet and ankles. Monks who ate richer diets than most people of their era, with more meat and wine, were disproportionately prone to gout. They grew ground elder in their physic gardens because it worked. When a plant is cultivated and maintained by educated, medically literate people across centuries, that isn't superstition. That's clinical observation carried across generations. The plant contains chlorogenic acid, caffeic acid, and flavonoids, including quercetin, all of which have demonstrated anti-inflammatory and diuretic effects in laboratory research. The diuretic action is key. Elevated uric acid, the underlying cause of gout, is cleared through the kidneys. Compounds that promote kidney filtration and urine output help move uric acid out of the body before it reaches the crystal formation threshold. That is precisely the mechanism that modern pharmaceutical gout treatments use, achieved through a different chemical pathway. Ground elder's scientific name, Agopodium podagraria, is itself a medical record. Podagraria comes from the Greek podagra, meaning gout of the foot. The people who named this plant named it for what it treated. That's how confident they were in what it did. Young ground elder leaves, harvested in early spring before the plant flowers, have a fresh, slightly herbal flavor similar to flat-leaf parsley and can be eaten raw in salads, blanched as a pot herb, stirred into soups, or dried for tea. After the plant flowers, the leaves become bitter and fibrous and lose culinary appeal. The spring harvest window, roughly 4 to 6 weeks, is when this plant is most useful as both food and medicine. For tea, steep 1 tablespoon of fresh or dried young leaves in hot water for 10 minutes. Drink daily during flare-up periods. A weed that gardeners spend seasons trying to eradicate was planted by people who were trying to keep it. The knowledge of why it belonged there was simply never passed forward. Number 5. Cleavers. The lymphatic system's oldest tonic. If you have walked through a hedgerow in early spring and emerged covered in small sticky green seeds clinging to your clothing, your pet, everything you were wearing, that was cleavers. The plant adheres to fur and fabric with a tenacity that is frankly impressive. It is one of the most universally recognized weeds in the temperate world and one of the most consistently underestimated from a medical standpoint. Cleavers, Gallium aperine, has been used as a lymphatic tonic across European folk medicine, Native American herbal traditions, and Ayurvedic practice for centuries. These are not connected traditions. They arrived at the same plant for the same purpose independently. That cross-cultural pattern points towards something the body itself is responding to consistently. The lymphatic system is the body's parallel circulatory network. It carries immune cells, drains metabolic waste from tissues, and moves fluid that the cardiovascular system cannot. It operates without a pump, unlike the heart-driven blood system, and relies on movement, pressure, and specific biochemical signals. When lymphatic drainage becomes sluggish, the consequences accumulate: swollen lymph nodes that won't clear, persistent tissue puffiness, slow recovery from infection, and a general feeling of immune heaviness that is difficult to describe but unmistakable to those who experience it. Cleavers contains tannins, flavonoids, including galliosin, and iridoid glycosides that have demonstrated diuretic and lymphagogue activity in research, meaning they promote the specific kind of fluid movement through lymphatic tissue that the plant has been used for traditionally. Traditional European herbalists use cleavers almost exclusively as a spring tonic, harvested at the moment it was most abundant and most fresh, as a deliberate effort to move what had accumulated during the low-activity months of winter. That timing reflects sophisticated, if empirically rather than scientifically derived, understanding of seasonal physiology. Cold-pressed juice from fresh cleavers is the most potent preparation. Blend the raw stems and leaves with a small amount of water and strain through cloth. Drink 2 to 3 tablespoons in water each morning for 2 to 3 weeks. The juice has a mild, fresh, slightly grassy flavor. Tea from dried cleavers is gentler but still useful. Soak 1 tablespoon of dried herb in cold water overnight, a cold infusion, not a hot tea. Strain and drink in the morning. Heat reduces the iridoid content. The cold water extraction is the traditional method for good phytochemical reasons. Swollen glands that won't clear. Water retention that no amount of walking resolves. A lymphatic system that feels blocked. This is the plant traditional medicine reaches for first, and modern botanical research is beginning to understand why. Number 4. Sheep sorrel. The tart weed that cancer researchers keep studying. Sheep sorrel grows in poor acidic soil, thin lawns, disturbed ground, the edges of gravel paths. It's low-growing, with arrow-shaped leaves and reddish flower spikes. Most people who notice it at all assume it's a grass. Bite a leaf and you know immediately it isn't. The sharp, intensely sour flavor, almost citric, comes from oxalic acid, the same compound found in spinach and rhubarb. That tartness is one of the easiest field identifications in botanical medicine. It is also a signal pointing to a chemistry worth understanding. Sheep sorrel has been used as a food plant across Europe and Asia for generations. It was standard in French cuisine, used to flavor broths, and eaten as a spring green when other vegetables weren't yet available. Native American nations, including the Iroquois, used it as a cooling food for fever and inflammation. The plant was never obscure. It was simply reclassified. The compound profile of sheep sorrel includes vitamin C in meaningful quantities, alongside hyperoside and vitexin, flavonoids studied for anti-inflammatory activity and cardiovascular protective effects. But the research that put sheep sorrel on the radar of oncology scientists is more specific. It is one of 4 plants in the traditional formula called Essiac, developed in the early 20th century by Canadian nurse Renée Caisse from an Ojibwe herbal tradition, and subsequently studied across multiple decades for potential anti-tumor effects. Laboratory studies on sheep sorrel extracts specifically have found cytotoxic activity against certain cancer cell lines under controlled conditions, meaning compounds in the plant appear to interfere with cancer cell proliferation in a laboratory setting. That research does not constitute clinical proof of anything, and it shouldn't be presented as such. But it has generated sustained, serious scientific attention for decades. That attention itself is significant. As a food, sheep sorrel leaves add a bright, refreshing tartness to salads. Traditional European medicine used it as a cooling remedy for fever, a mild diuretic, and a digestive aid, all consistent with its antioxidant and mineral profile. For tea, steep 2 teaspoons of dried leaf in cool or warm water rather than boiling, as heat degrades the oxalic acid balance. A cold infusion overnight in the refrigerator, strained and drunk in the morning, preserves the full flavonoid content. A weed growing in your worst soil that has been studied by cancer researchers for decades. Most people walk past it daily without recognition. Number 3. Self-heal, earning its name across 1,000 years. The name sounds like marketing. It isn't. Prunella vulgaris earned the name self-heal not through any single dramatic discovery, but through centuries of consistent observed outcomes across European and Asian herbal traditions that had no contact with each other and arrived at identical conclusions. Self-heal is low-growing with small purple flower spikes and oval leaves. It appears in lawns, meadows, and garden margins from spring through autumn across the entire northern hemisphere. In medieval Europe, it was the primary wound herb before more exotic botanicals became available. Pressed onto cuts, applied to mouth sores, brewed for sore throats. In traditional Chinese medicine, it appeared under the name Sha Kucao and was used for entirely overlapping purposes. That level of convergence across unrelated civilizations is from an ethnobotanical research perspective. Modern phytochemistry has found something that explains the breadth of that reputation. Self-heal contains rosmarinic acid, one of the most potently studied antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds found in any common plant, alongside ursolic acid, with documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects, and rotin, a flavonoid that strengthens blood vessel walls and reduces capillary fragility. In clinical studies, self-heal preparations have measurably accelerated wound closure and reduced mouth ulcer healing time. Those are not impressive results for a pharmaceutical compound. For a common lawn plant, they are remarkable. But the research that has generated the most sustained scientific interest centers on antiviral activity. Laboratory studies have found that self-heal extracts demonstrate inhibitory effects against herpes simplex virus, influenza. That research is ongoing and has not progressed to clinical trials, but the interest from serious research institutions. Rosmarinic acid is considered a credible candidate compound in several of these mechanisms. Brew 2 teaspoons of fresh or dried self-heal flower and leaf as a tea in hot, but not boiling water, around 80 degrees Celsius for 8 minutes. Drink for sore throat, mouth inflammation, or general immune support. Crush fresh leaves and press directly onto minor wounds or inflamed skin. The plant is edible, mildly bitter, and works in soups and salads. A plant called self-heal. Earning that name independently across 1,000 years on multiple continents is a form of evidence worth respecting. Number 2. The wilderness plant. What happened to Elijah in the desert? There is a moment in the first book of Kings, chapter 19, that reads less like religious text and more like a medical case history. Elijah had just accomplished something of extraordinary consequence and then immediately collapsed. He walked into the wilderness, alone, without food, without water, sat beneath a broom tree, and asked to die. The language of the text is precise about his physical state: exhausted, depleted, finished. He fell asleep on the ground. That's where the story shifts. An angel appears, not with a vision or a message, but with something to eat. Bread baked on coals. A jar of water. And then the angel says something specific: get up and eat, because the journey is too great for you. That sequence happens twice. Elijah eats. Elijah sleeps again. The angel returns. He eats again, and then travels 40 days on the strength of that food. One meal, twice, and 40 days of journeying through desert terrain. That isn't just poetry. That is a precise description of metabolic restoration from a specific state of depletion. The bread baked on coals, described in that passage, corresponds most closely to what historians identify as a flatbread made with emmer wheat, and possibly a form of ground-dried legumes, high in complex carbohydrate, B vitamins, and the amino acids that a body running on stress hormones and adrenaline burns through first. The water addresses acute dehydration. Together, these are exactly the macronutrient profile that modern sports medicine describes for recovery from extreme physical and psychological exhaustion. Glycogen repletion, electrolyte restoration, B vitamin support for adrenal function. The science now has names for what the text described. The broom tree itself, the plant Elijah collapsed beneath, is Retama ratam, a desert shrub found across the Sinai and Negev. Traditional Bedouin medicine has used its young shoots as an anti-inflammatory preparation for centuries. Its alkaloids, including spartine and cytosine, are studied for cardiovascular and diuretic effects. That Elijah sought shade specifically beneath this plant rather than any other is, at minimum, consistent with a tradition that recognized it as useful. What the Elijah narrative captures, in concrete physical terms, is the relationship between profound depletion and precise nourishment. Not abundance. Not variety. The right thing at the right moment in adequate quantity. The body can recover from extraordinary exhaustion when the restoration is biochemically correct. That principle runs through every plant in this list. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, the idea that scripture and science are often describing the same thing from different vantage points, hit like and subscribe, because what's coming next goes even deeper. Number 1. Creeping Charlie. The most scientifically studied weed in your lawn. Creeping Charlie is almost certainly in your yard right now. Low to the ground, spreading in dense mats across lawn edges and shaded areas. Small scalloped leaves with a distinctly minty aromatic smell when crushed. Tiny purple-blue flowers in spring. Lawn care companies listed alongside Dandelion as a primary target for broadleaf herbicide. It is, by conventional landscaping standards, a nuisance. It is also one of the most pharmacologically documented weeds in temperate North America, with a research profile spanning more than 4 decades across multiple areas of biomedical science, and most people who spray it every April have never heard a single fact about what it contains. The primary bioactive compounds in Creeping Charlie: rosmarinic acid, ursolic acid, and a collection of flavonoids, including luteolin and apigenin, have been studied individually and in combination for anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antimicrobial, and neuroprotective effects. Rosmarinic acid alone, present in Creeping Charlie in measurable concentrations, has been studied in the context of Alzheimer's disease, specifically for its potential to inhibit the aggregation of amyloid beta protein, the peptide deposits that are central to the disease's progression. The research mechanism is considered sufficiently credible to sustain continued investigation at serious academic institutions. That does not mean Creeping Charlie prevents or treats Alzheimer's. It means that a compound concentrated in a plant most people spray with herbicide is under investigation by neurological researchers for one of the most consequential diseases of our time. That gap between public awareness and scientific attention is worth sitting with. Luteolin, also present in Creeping Charlie, has been studied for activity against multiple cancer cell lines, for its effects on neuroinflammation, the chronic low-grade brain inflammation increasingly linked to cognitive decline, and as a potential natural mast cell stabilizer in allergy research, meaning it may reduce the release of histamine and other inflammatory signals from immune cells. Apigenin has been studied for anxiolytic effects, for anti-tumor activity, and for its interaction with estrogen receptor pathways relevant to hormone-sensitive conditions. These are not fringe interests. These are mainstream research areas attracting serious scientific resources, and the plant in question spreads across the average suburban lawn uninvited every spring. Traditional European herbalism used creeping Charlie for exactly what the research suggests it can do: respiratory congestion, sinus inflammation, ear complaints, bitter digestive tonic function. Nicholas Culpeper, the 17th century English physician and herbalist whose work shaped plant medicine across Britain and its colonies for generations, wrote that creeping Charlie served as a general remedy for the whole body. Modern phytochemistry is developing the vocabulary to explain what Culpeper observed empirically. What makes creeping Charlie particularly interesting from a preparation standpoint is that rosmarinic acid is water-soluble. A tea made from creeping Charlie should use hot water well below boiling, around 65 to 70 degrees. What feels warm but not scalding on the wrist. Steep covered for 10 to 15 minutes. Covering the cup matters. The aromatic volatile compounds, including some of the anti-inflammatory monoterpenes, will escape into the steam if the tea is left uncovered. That preparation detail is something almost no wellness source ever mentions, but it meaningfully affects what ends up in your cup. Add young spring leaves to salads and soups. The flavor is mildly herbal, slightly bitter, aromatic, functional, rather than unpleasant. The plant is edible, nutritious, and genuinely interesting to cook with once you stop seeing it as a problem. The most comprehensively researched weed on this entire list is the one most aggressively targeted by lawn care products. 40 years of continuous biomedical research. Multiple disease categories under active investigation. A traditional reputation dating back centuries. And it's growing right now in the cracks between your patio stones. The principle that runs through all 12. If you made it through this list, your relationship with what grows outside your door has changed. And there's one thing worth saying clearly before you go. Every plant in this countdown has a version that works and a version that doesn't. And the difference is almost always what happens between the field and the cup, or the garden and the plate. Rosmarinic acid degrades above 70 degrees. Omega-3s and Purslane oxidize with prolonged heat. Aucuban and plantain releases most effectively from a crushed rather than a torn leaf. Inulin and dandelion root survives roasting better than boiling. The active compounds in cleavers are destroyed by heat and preserved by cold water. Every one of these plants has a preparation method that the people who used it historically understood, even without the vocabulary of phytochemistry, because they could observe which preparations produced results. What industrial food processing does, what pharmaceutical standardization does, is remove the relationship between preparation and outcome. It reduces a plant to a single extracted compound, shelf-stabilized, heat-treated, stripped of the cofactors and synergistic molecules that surrounded it in the living plant and that made it work the way generations of people observed it working. The supplement on the store shelf is often a pale chemical shadow of the plant it came from, processed in ways that destroy the very things that made the plant valuable. Your ancestors didn't have laboratories. They had time, observation, and the discipline to pay attention across generations. The knowledge they accumulated, which plants, which parts, which season, which preparation, is encoded in traditional medicine because it was tested across longer timeframes than any clinical trial can replicate. The 12 plants in this video are free. They are growing now, within walking distance of wherever you are. The barrier is not access. It's recognition. It's knowing what you're looking at when you walk past it. If this resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe, because we're just beginning. There are forgotten foods, ancient drinks, biblical remedies, and healing plants from traditions across the world that deserve this kind of attention. Drop in the comments what you want to see next. And if you know someone who would find this genuinely useful, someone managing a health condition, someone skeptical of the pharmaceutical model, someone who gardens and never knew what was already growing there, share this with them. The knowledge was never lost. It was only forgotten.